26 years old and still living with my parents. I'm not content with my job, and I'm in a relationship that I'm unsure about. To say I've been stressed is an understatement. My mom and I were not getting along 1 week, and everyone was just bothering me. I wanted to escape for a weekend. I looked into small one-bedroom Airbnbs in the mountains and found one for cheap. It was in Troutdale, Virginia, a couple of hours away. Based on the pictures, it was a nice, private, and peaceful little place, surrounded by woods. It was fall, so the foliage was going to be beautiful. I told my parents I was going there for the weekend. My mom seemed overly happy about me leaving for the weekend. My girlfriend was more confused, finding it weird and suspicious that I was going away to some random cabin in the woods alone for a weekend. When Friday came, I packed a backpack full of clothes, toiletries, and my laptop, and I headed out. It was about a 2.5-hour drive. The area of Troutdale was very quiet and scenic. It was a perfect escape from suburbia back home. I needed a nice weekend just to spend by myself. I was driving up a gravel road when my GPS told me I had arrived. I saw an opening in the trees next to the road. The instructions from the Airbnb owner were to cut through this opening onto the grass and up the little hill. I did this and saw the cute little house at the top of the hill. The second I stepped out of the car, I inhaled the fresh rural air and instantly felt happy I did this. The owner told me where to find the key to the front door. I let myself in and checked the place out. It was a nice, cozy living room, a small kitchen, a bathroom, and one loft bedroom that you had to climb a ladder-like stairway to access. There was a circular window over the bed, allowing lots of light into the house, which was nice. I went out to walk some of the trails the owner told me about, which were about a 5-minute drive away. On the drive back to the house, I noticed 2 guys walking down the gravel road. As my car passed, they literally stopped in their tracks to turn and look at me. I waved and smiled, thinking they were friendly locals, but they didn't wave back. It was completely off-putting. They looked at me as if driving down the road was a crime. I didn't look back. I turned into the entrance of the property and went back up the hill. I started reading one of the books I brought in the living room with the fireplace going. It was incredibly cozy. The sun was setting, and after reading a chapter of my book, I realized I was getting hungry. I went outside to my car, about to drive to the nearest Walmart, when I noticed 2 men kind of running into the woods down the hill by the entrance of the property, probably in response to seeing me come outside. I wondered if it was those 2 guys from the road earlier. It was incredibly strange. I suddenly decided to take my laptop and backpack with me in the car while I was gone, just to be safe. On the drive into town, I messaged the owner, letting him know about this. He replied, saying it's nothing to be alarmed about, that there are a lot of teens in the area who walk around. So I dismissed it. I drove about 20 minutes to the closest Walmart, since there were no grocery stores in the area. I picked up a few food items to hold me over: some milk, granola bars, fruit, frozen dinners, bread, and cold cuts. By the time I got back to the Airbnb, it was completely pitch black. There were no street lights on these gravel roads, and with no neighboring houses, the only light was from my headlights. It was creepy, for sure. I pulled up the hill to the little house. It was almost hard to find in the dark. I grabbed my backpack and the grocery bag and went up to the house in the dark, using my phone's flashlight to see. Once inside, I locked the door immediately. It was creepy out there. I ate quickly and went back to reading my book by the fire. Pretty soon, the lights in the room suddenly cut out, and the only light in the entire house was from the fireplace. I tried flicking on anything electric, but the power was gone. I went to message the owner again, who swiftly replied, suggesting I check the main breaker in the circuit box outside by the telephone pole near the back of the house. I didn't reply. There was no way I was going out there. I was already paranoid from earlier, and why would the power randomly cut out anyway? Something was off. I heard a creak in the floorboard from the darkest corner of the room by the bathroom door. I looked over and saw a tall, looming figure in the doorway of the bathroom, lit up only by the fireplace. My worst fear had been realized. This was actually happening. My wife Cheryl and I have been together for 10 years, and we got married 2 years ago. We just got a house together, not even a month ago, and things couldn't have started on a worse note. We moved to a small inland town in Georgia called Waycross. That's all the details I'm giving to avoid any more possible issues. We're on a quiet street with a big property that sits in front of a medium-sized patch of woods, which was one of the factors that really appealed to us. We plan to adopt a dog and raise kids here, so we wanted a big property for them to play on. We both work similar shifts. I get home around 5, and she gets home around 6 most of the time. The first 2 nights in the house went completely normal. It was the weekend, so we spent our entire days unpacking. It wasn't until Monday night, when we were both in bed, having turned out the lights maybe 20 minutes earlier, that we heard this blasting music coming from the backyard. Our nearest neighbors on either side are spaced out enough that we couldn't mistake music from their yards being in ours. It was definitely in our backyard, and it wasn't party music or anything like that. It sounded like very old, staticky, vintage music. The windows were shut, so after my wife and I exchanged horrified glances and wondered where the music could be coming from, I opened my window on my side of the bed, and it was much clearer. There was some song that sounded like it was from the 1940s blasting. I later found out, after looking up the lyrics, that the song was Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Wolf by Henry Hall. It has a slightly eerie vibe to it for some reason, even though it's meant to be a happy song. But at the time, hearing it coming from our backyard was nothing but downright horrifying. We were still learning the house, but we figured there must be a backyard light switch downstairs. I ran downstairs to the back door and flicked the light switches next to the door, and one of them turned on the backyard lights. I didn't see anyone in the backyard. I opened the door, and the music was louder, obviously, but as I walked out into the grass, I realized it wasn't coming from the backyard, but from the woods. The song played to completion as I stood outside, looking around. When the song ended, there was silence again. It seemed like someone must have been playing a stupid housewarming prank, but it wasn't appreciated. I went back to my wife and told her it was probably just some kids trying to scare the new ones in town. Hearing myself even say that, I realized how stupid and weird it sounded. Why would anyone do that? The next night, it happened again. A few minutes after we turned out the lights in the bedroom, music from outside started blasting, this time much louder. The song playing was Tiptoe Through the Tulips. Cheryl and I once again looked at each other, this time in genuine disgust and worry, because we had hoped it was just going to be a one-time thing, but it was happening again. I looked out the window, and this time I could see something on the grass. It wasn't a person, but there was definitely something out there. I told my wife I was going to check it out. She said we should just call the cops, and I said, yeah, we will in a second. I went out there with the mindset that I needed to establish myself as the man of the house, not just to my wife, but to whoever was thinking they could mess with us, just for being the new people on the block. When I was in the yard, I saw the object in the grass was smaller than I had thought, but the blaring creepy song was coming from it. I realized it was an old radio. I turned it off and looked up at the window at my wife, who was watching. I held it up and yelled that someone left it there to scare us with the music. What she did next was not something I expected. She started screaming my name to run inside. She kept screaming, "Run!" I yelled, "Why?" And she screamed back, "There's people standing behind you." The statement made my heart skip a beat, and I turned around to face the woods. I saw 3 figures standing about 6 feet apart from each other, clearly facing my direction. They weren't running at me. They were just standing there. I yelled, "Oh, __," and ran back inside the house, slamming the door behind me. My wife was upstairs, hysterical and crying already. I told her I'd call the cops, and I did. They arrived, thankfully, not that long after. All the while, we were scared to hear knocks at one of the doors or windows. My wife and I desperately explained the situation to both of the police officers who arrived, and I showed them the radio on the ground. I asked them if they could take it back with them as evidence for prints, and told them I only touched the top part with the handle. They did take the radio. They also checked the front of the woods with their flashlights for a few minutes, probably just as a deterrent to the people in the woods to stop their behavior if they were still there. When the police left, honestly, we went right back to feeling vulnerable and scared. But thank Christ, the people never returned. This was only a few weeks ago, though. God forbid they come back. I'll try to get it on video. Years ago, I worked the night shift at a gas station because I was strapped for cash and needed a second job. I worked the night shift there for a few months. Around my 2nd or 3rd month, a guy started regularly coming in really late at night, always around 2 a.m. He was about 6 feet tall with long stringy hair. He'd always come in, buy a tall boy, and leave. One night, he asked me my name. I told him, and he kept saying, "Rob, I like that," laughing to himself. He cracked open the tall boy he just bought and walked out of the store, talking to himself. He was clearly drunk. This night, I was curious to see if he had been drinking and driving every time he came to the store. I watched as he left and walked out of sight, off the gas station property. That made sense since he never once bought gas. Anytime he came in, he'd just buy alcohol. I saw him almost every night after that for a while. He'd come in some nights, noticeably drunker than others, sometimes just leaning on one of the shelves and not saying anything. He'd always greet me with a "Hey, Rob," whenever he came in. One night, he was just leaning on a shelf, drinking the tall boy he had just bought, not saying anything, just staring at a wall. I finally asked him for his name. He looked at me, took about 5 seconds, and said, "Bob." I always felt like Bob was a go-to fake name when someone is lying about their name. I wondered if the first thing that came to mind for him was Bob, because it rhymes with my name, but I went with it. I said, "So Bob, where do you work?" He laughed so loud it actually startled me. He said he didn't work, and that the government completely screwed him out of his job. I got the vibe he was wasted again. He looked at me with an angry face, but then said, "I like you, Rob. You seem like you know what you're doing." I didn't know what that meant, but he walked out of the store right after that. I didn't see him again for a while. Over a week passed, which for a regular like him was unusual. Bob always gave me this mildly creepy vibe. I figured he was usually drunk, but something was obviously wrong in his personal life. One very stormy night, with fewer customers than usual, likely because of the storm, I heard the ding of the front door as someone entered. I imagined it to be Bob before looking, and when I looked, I was shocked to see it was actually him, but a much scarier version of Bob. He was completely soaked, not wearing a rain jacket or using an umbrella, just in a dark shirt and jeans. His long hair was drenched, and he was just standing by the door, looking straight ahead at the wall. He looked angry, and yet like his mind was elsewhere, like his thoughts were running wild. The way he was standing there, blankly staring at nothing, completely soaked, was freaking me out. I said, "Bob, are you okay?" He didn't turn his head or move. He stood still and said, "I did something really bad." I asked, "What did you do?" He then looked at me and said, "I need somewhere to hide," then walked past me at the register toward the little restroom hallway. He disappeared behind the wall, and I heard one of the doors open and close. I was genuinely getting uncomfortable with Bob now. I didn't enjoy his presence whenever he was in the store, and tonight something was extra off about him. He seemed like a zombie, and that "I did something really bad" comment was incredibly creepy. Some time passed, and Bob never came out of the bathroom. I assumed he was wasted again, probably passed out or puking. Either way, I didn't want to intervene. The next thing I remember, the lights to the place cut out, and the store was completely dark. I was standing in a pitch-dark gas station during a major storm with an unhinged drunk man. I used the flashlight from behind the counter to make my way towards the back of the store, by the inventory storage and the panel board. The door to the back was in the same little hallway as the restrooms. As I walked by the two restroom doors, both of them were ajar, and Bob wasn't in either of them. I went through the door to the back. I was planning on going straight to the panel board, but I stopped when I heard a slight dripping in the room somewhere, and the squeaking of wet shoes. My heart sank into my stomach. I said, "Bob," in a very weak and scared voice. I heard squeaks right to my left. When I pointed my flashlight in that corner, there was Bob with his eyes open wide, and he lunged at me, screaming, "I'm going to kill you." I pushed him off as he was clawing at my back. I ran back through the door to the front of the store, and he didn't follow me. I grabbed my rain jacket and ran straight to my car. I sat in my car as I dialed 911 and spoke to an operator. It didn't take long for a couple of police officers to arrive and go inside with me. Bob was still hiding in the back room, huddled in a corner like some rabid creature. His pupils were huge. I only noticed it then. He was on something. They took him to the station. After I told them, he lunged at me, threatened to kill me, and stated that he did something really bad earlier. I found out over a month later that this Bob guy's real name was Martin, and he had brutally beaten his ex-wife to death. It might have happened on that same night he came into the gas station. Long story short, I never wanted to work another night shift at any job ever again after this. About 3 months ago, I moved into an apartment in Chicago with 2 other guys so I could attend college. There are a few things that make the building not so great. For example, most apartment rooms face the corridor where people on the same floor constantly walk back and forth to get in or out of the building. If you keep your windows open, anyone passing by can see into your room. But since I spend most of my time at college, and the guys I live with, along with most of the neighbors, are really nice, these things don't bother me much. A few nights ago, while getting ready for bed, I heard music playing from somewhere. It was mostly pop songs from the 2000s. Since we live in a student-friendly city full of frat houses and the like, I thought nothing of it. There were probably a bunch of parties going on, or maybe some friends were listening to music on the street. I got into bed and let a random video play on my phone to help me fall asleep, as I often do. But as I started to doze off, I heard drilling noises. At first, I thought I was just sleepy and hearing things, or maybe the sound was coming from my phone. But I paused the video and listened closely. There was definitely someone using a drill nearby. I got up and walked around the apartment, feeling confused. It was around 11 p.m., so there was no way someone could still be working. The sound was louder at my bedroom window, so I opened it to check and quickly realized it was coming from the neighboring apartment, the one closest to my window. At that moment, I also realized the music was coming from there. No one lives in that specific apartment, so my confusion only grew. But then I figured maybe someone had planned to rent it, talked it over with the landlord, and he ordered something to be fixed. Still, the fact that they were doing it so late on a Thursday felt really strange. I went back to trying to sleep, but the noise wouldn't stop. I was texting a friend and eventually started complaining about it, sending him audio recordings and even a video directed at the window where all the noise was coming from. He said I should call the police because there was no way it was legal for someone to be doing this, especially in a building full of apartments. I decided against it since I just wanted to get some rest, and it was already past midnight. I forced myself to sleep through the drilling sounds, but a little past 1 a.m., I woke up again, this time to hammering. Feeling stressed, but not enough to take action just yet, I tried to sleep once more, only to wake up again. This time, I didn't even check what time it was. I was totally fed up, so I put on a robe and went to confront whoever it was. The window to the apartment was open, so I decided to talk to the people from there. The window was located above the stairs, so I had to go down a few steps to get in view, and I'd look even shorter being seen from there. But that was the last thing on my mind. As soon as I got to the window, I felt most of my courage leave me. In that room, there were 4 men who all seemed to be around their 30s or 40s. They all stopped what they were doing to look at me. Now, only the song coming from the radio could be heard, and somehow it felt chilling to have all those other noises stop so abruptly. Even though that's what I wanted just seconds earlier, I definitely didn't want to be the focus of these 4 men. Another thing that bothered me, but I didn't think about until the next day, was the men's peculiar choice of music. It just felt creepy to realize that middle-aged men were listening to songs that teenagers or even pre-teens would be listening to. None of them looked shocked to see me. They just had puzzled looks. Remembering why I was there in the first place, I said, "Excuse me, it's pretty late, and most people here have work early in the morning. If it's not too much to ask, can you guys do this some other time?" Now, mind you, I'm a pretty short and small 19-year-old who didn't even think to put on something other than a robe. So when two of those men in their 40s came to the window and towered over me, looking up and down at my body almost like predators, I froze up and felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. They were both sweaty and had their mouths agape, and one of them held a hammer that looked quite heavy. They started smiling in a sick, twisted way, and I felt a sudden urge to throw up. Extremely unsettled, I slowly made my way back to my apartment, not taking my eyes off the men, feeling like they might try to grab me. When I got to the last step of the stairs and close enough to the window, as soon as I was out of their view, I dashed to my front door, got inside, and locked it. One of the guys who lives with me was out of town that night, and I presumed the other one was asleep since he hadn't seen my text in our group chat asking if anyone had moved into that apartment. I got back into my room and didn't hear any tools again. Even the radio seemed to have been turned off. I wasn't really sure how to feel about that, because now I wasn't angry, just disgusted and creeped out. I know I should have called the cops by then, but I was just too stressed to deal with that any longer. Checking the time, it was about 2:15. I got into bed again, tricking myself into thinking I wasn't scared, just craving some sleep. Eventually, I passed out. I woke up in the middle of the night again. This time, it was around 3:30, and I could hear no sounds coming from the apartment. Everything was quiet, and that quickly started to bother me. It was too quiet. I had to have heard or felt something to wake up. The silence was making me uneasy, and I had a feeling that someone might have been on the other side of my closed window. I tried not to think about it, but I couldn't get a peaceful sleep after that. The next morning, as I was going out, I went past the same window and noticed it was closed. It was as if the previous night had never even happened, but I asked the guy who was home with me if he heard anything. He said he had woken up several times during the night, but couldn't get up and do something about it due to sleep paralysis. Either way, that confirmed I wasn't imagining things. Those people really were there. But then, how did they have the keys to the building? And that apartment? Why did it seem like they didn't want to be seen during the day? What were they thinking of doing to me, or maybe any passerby? It's been a week now, and thankfully, I haven't seen those men again. Still, I have no idea who they were or what they were doing, and I'm honestly scared to even think about the possibility that they might come back or still be lurking around. There was a time when I joined my brother-in-law, Ben, on a fishing trip with a few of his friends and my sister. Ben had always lived a comfortable life, and since my sister married him, she's been living the same way. I packed a small backpack with everything I'd need to spend the night on his boat, and drove out to the nicer part of town by his house, which was right by the bay. His backyard literally led to the water, with a small wooden dock connected to his luxurious boat, named after my sister, Emily. Inspired by Forrest Gump, he had her name painted on the boat. We set sail early in the morning. Ben had packed tons of food and snacks, including plenty of hamburger meat, since, unsurprisingly, they had a barbecue installed on the boat. They always had to have the best of everything, and honestly, it was a bit annoying. A few hours into the trip, it wasn't as fun as I had imagined. Only one largemouth bass had been caught, and of course, Ben was the one who caught it. The others were getting really drunk, and I tried to get my sister to let me have a drink, but she kept saying no because I was only 17 at the time. She's always been a bit of a buzzkill, and at that moment, I wondered why I even agreed to come along. The only part of the trip I enjoyed was relaxing and tanning on the back deck of Ben's unnecessarily large boat. As the sun began to set, painting the sky a beautiful orange, Ben started grilling the burgers. It seemed odd to me since we had caught 3 fish by that time, which would have been a more fitting dinner, but I preferred burgers anyway, so I didn't complain. By the time we finished eating, it was dark. There was something both calming and unsettling about being in the middle of the ocean at night, like being in space. Nothing around you as far as the eye can see, and without your boat, you'd be as good as gone. Everyone was insanely drunk by now, blasting music, screaming, and laughing. They eventually invited me to play cards with them inside, so I joined in. I didn't have anything else to do anyway. There was an extra beer on the counter, so I grabbed it. At that point, I didn't care anymore, and my sister was too out of it to stop me. After 3 beers, I finally loosened up and started to enjoy myself. I had to lower the music earlier because it was too loud to even hear myself talk. Ben and his friends were completely wasted by now, and my sister was drunker than I'd ever seen her, though not as bad as them. But it was all fine. They were just adults trying to have a good time, safe and secluded on a boat in calm waters, far from any land. But then, things took a horribly unexpected turn. Over the now quieter music, one of Ben's friends and I heard a noise coming from outside. I turned off the music completely, and we all heard it. A faint call for help from outside. We rushed to the side of the boat, where we saw a small boat with 2 men looking up at us. I asked them what was wrong, and one of them said they were out of food and gas and needed help. I didn't feel good about the situation, but everyone else was too drunk to make any important decisions. It felt like it was up to me. Ben told them to wait while he went to get the ladder, but he tripped and dropped his beer on the way. I figured I'd hate myself if I didn't help, so I helped Ben carry the ladder to the edge and hook it to the railing. The 2 men climbed aboard and thanked us. Ben, my sister, and their friends were too drunk to speak clearly, so I apologized to the men, explaining that everyone had a bit too much to drink. They didn't seem to acknowledge my comment, and instead asked Ben if we had any extra food. We led them to the kitchen, where Ben handed them the leftover burgers, which they quickly ate. I still felt uneasy about the situation, but after we gave them a can of gasoline, they thanked us and climbed back down the ladder. We all went to sleep after that. Ben and my sister took the bedroom while I slept on the couch. I tried to get some sleep, but eventually got up to get a drink and use the bathroom. Ben had told us to pee into the ocean to save water on the boat. When I stepped outside, I expected to hear the calm splashing of water, but instead, I heard the faint sound of a boat engine. The darkness surrounding the boat made it impossible to see where the sound was coming from, so I turned on the searchlight. I scanned the waters and eventually spotted the same boat from earlier, now coming closer. At that exact moment, I heard a blood-curdling scream from below deck. I rushed back inside to find one of Ben's friends standing in the corner, the other sitting up in shock. Ben and my sister burst out of their room to see what was happening. One of Ben's friends managed to say that he saw two figures standing over him before they ran out the front door to the deck. We ran outside, but there was no sign of them. I pointed out where I had seen the boat, but by then it was already gone. We searched the boat, and all we found missing were a few cans of gasoline, Ben's wallet, and his keys, which he had left on the kitchen table. We sped back to Ben's house that night, taking 4 hours to get there. Thankfully, no one had broken in, and Ben used the spare key hidden in the backyard to get inside. The locks were changed the next day. The scariest part is that just a few weeks ago, their security cameras caught two men trying to unlock their front door before quickly running off. We're 99% sure it was them. I seem to attract stalkers and bullies, probably because I'm shy and don't talk much. For people like that, I guess it makes me an easy target. They think they can take advantage of me without any pushback. For reference, I'm a 28-year-old woman. I'm not the best at telling stories, so forgive me if I ramble or if this is a bit long. This all started around November 2011 and went on for about a year and a half. I was living alone in a small 2-bedroom house at the end of a street near a quiet, open field. The area wasn't the safest, but it wasn't terrible either. Somewhere in between. I didn't hang out with friends much because of work, errands, and classes, and all my family lived out of state. So I was mostly alone, which I liked. I'm pretty independent and keep to myself. I couldn't afford a car then, so I had to walk past my neighbor's house to get to the main road toward the park where I jogged. One neighbor, who lived a few houses down, noticed my routine and decided he needed to rescue me from my loneliness. My schedule was pretty predictable. Wake up at 5:45 a.m. for a jog, work at 6:30, lunch break at 11 o'clock for an hour, home at 4 o'clock, art class at 5:30, maybe another jog at 7:30, and home by 8:30. I know it sounds boring, but it helps me keep track of what I need to do. Despite this routine, I was always aware of my surroundings, and I started noticing my neighbor standing outside every time I was out. Whenever I returned home, he would watch me until I got inside, then turn back to his house. After a few weeks of this, he started with small talk, simple stuff like, "Hey, how are you?" I'd just give a polite nod, mumble a quick "good," and wave goodbye. But each time, he would try to engage more. "Do you live alone? Where do you work? How come you don't get many visitors?" I tried to be polite, but vague, not giving away too much. "I work in town. I'm just really busy," I'd say, nervously fumbling with my headphones. This went on for months. He kept trying to pry into my life, even blocking me while I jogged. He got more aggressive, asking where I was going and why, and once I even caught him going through my mail before quickly putting it back in my box. When my best friend visited once, the next day my neighbor was grilling me about who it was. Was that your boyfriend? He stayed for hours. What were you doing? I was fed up and just shrugged it off, saying, none of your business, and quickly jogged away. One evening, after coming back from a jog, he ran toward me, looking really angry. He blocked my path, crossing his arms, and yelled, "We need to talk now." I was taken aback. He was a big guy, much taller than me. I'm only 5'3" and about 115 pounds, so he easily towered over me. "About what?" I asked, trying to stay calm. He started ranting about how he sees me walking alone every day, how he knows everything about me, and how he could save me because he loved me. I took a few steps back, feeling scared and uncomfortable. But then, anger started building up inside me. I yelled back at him, saying he didn't know anything about me and how he could possibly love me when we barely knew each other. I told him I liked being on my own, that I wasn't interested in being friends, and that his constant snooping and questions made me uncomfortable. I made it clear, leave me alone. But instead of backing off, he just laughed like I had told the funniest joke. He then got serious again, saying that he knew everything about me and that I needed to stop exercising so much. He suggested I come over to his house, have some beers, and live a little. I told him off again and quickly walked away, running to my house and slamming the door behind me. I could still hear him laughing outside. I called a friend and told them what happened. They suggested calling the cops, but for some reason I didn't. After that, I became paranoid. If I saw him outside, I would stay inside. I even stopped walking down that street, taking a different route through the field instead. I joined a gym so I could exercise without him watching me. But one rainy day, he spotted me cutting through the field. He started running toward me, but I made it to my house in time to lock the door. A few moments later, he was banging on the door, calling my name and telling me to open up. I waited until he left, then opened the door to find a small folded piece of paper with his phone number on it. I ripped it up and called the same friend to vent. They again suggested calling the cops, but since my lease was almost up and I was moving in less than a week, I didn't bother. On moving day, some friends and I were loading up the cars when the creepy neighbor came out, yelling, "Why didn't you tell me you were moving? You're supposed to tell me everything." My friend rolled down the window a bit and sarcastically replied, "I thought you knew everything," and we drove away, laughing. We never saw him again.